The rain had been falling since dawn, cold and relentless, drumming against the black umbrellas like a heartbeat that refused to stop. I stood alone beside the freshly dug grave, the wind clawing at my coat, watching as the casket carrying my mother sank into the ground. My mother, Margaret Hayes, the gentlest woman I had ever known, was being lowered into the wet soil, while my father, Richard Hayes, was nowhere in sight. He wasn't grieving in Seattle. He was smiling in Hawaii, his arm wrapped around his new mistress, a woman named Vanessa Cole, half his age and twice as cruel. The photo had gone up that morning on his company's social media. A champagne glass raised a caption that read, "New Beginnings." I stared at that post until my hands shook. Even at her funeral, he found a way to humiliate her. The people around me whispered. They said he was too broken to attend. They said he had loved her in his own way. But I knew better. I had grown up in that house, breathing in the silence between his words, the kind that cut sharper than any slap. I knew the sound of control disguised as love. The priest's voice trembled through the rain. I barely heard it. All I could see was the pale wood of the coffin and the black dirt swallowing it inch by inch. A child cried somewhere behind me, and the sound tore through me like glass. I clenched my fists and whispered to the grave, my voice shaking. "You didn't deserve this, Mom. You deserved peace, not a man who built walls around your heart." The rain mixed with my tears until I couldn't tell them apart. When the last handful of dirt hit the lid, a dull thud echoed through the air. It was the sound of an ending one that felt unfinished. My mother's friend Clara put a hand on my shoulder. "Lauren," she said softly, "you should go home. You've been standing here for hours." I nodded, but my feet didn't move. Home. The word meant nothing now. Home had died with her. As the cemetery emptied, I stayed behind my shoes, sinking into the mud. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, some meaningless condolence, another polite message from a distant relative who hadn't called in years. But then I saw the name on the screen. Mom. My breath caught in my throat. The letters blurred as I blinked hard, convincing myself it was a mistake. Maybe Clara had her phone. Maybe the service provider hadn't shut it off yet. But then I saw the message. "I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now." My heart stopped. The rain seemed to fall louder, the world spinning into something unreal. I stared at the screen until my reflection looked like a ghost staring back. I felt the air leave my lungs. My fingers trembled as I reread the words, each one carving into me like ice. "I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now." My first thought was madness. My second was hope. And somewhere deep beneath both was fear. I looked around the cemetery empty, except for the gray mist curling between tombstones. The trees bent under the wind, whispering like voices from underground. My mind screamed at me to leave, but something inside me, some instinct I didn't understand, told me to go back. The rain hit harder, as if the sky itself wanted to drown the truth before it surfaced. My chest felt tight, my hands numb, but I started walking anyway, each step slower than the last. Somewhere behind me, thunder rolled across the sky, long and deep like a warning. I didn't know what waited for me in that graveyard, but I knew I was going to find out. And in that moment, I didn't realize that the message wasn't just a lie or a miracle. It was the beginning of everything my father had tried to bury. The phone felt like it was burning in my hand. I could hear the faint vibration echoing inside my skull, louder than the rain outside. My mother's name glowed on the screen, each letter steady alive. It shouldn't have been possible. My mind refused to believe it, but my body reacted first. My knees weakened, breath shallow. For a few seconds, I stood there in the cemetery, unable to move, surrounded by gravestones that suddenly felt like witnesses. My mother's grave was only 10 feet away, the fresh dirt still soft, but her message pulsed in front of me like a living heartbeat. "I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now." I whispered into the rain. This isn't real. But a part of me, the part that used to wake in the middle of the night to check if she was breathing, told me it was. My brain screamed logic, but my heart didn't care. I grabbed my car keys and ran. The cemetery lights blurred into streaks of gold as I reached the gate, water soaking through my shoes. My car waited under a flickering street lamp. The door creaked as I yanked it open and collapsed inside, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I turned the key and the engine groaned to life. The wipers swept frantically across the glass, but the rain came harder, a wall of silver slicing through the night. My reflection stared back from the windshield, pale, wide-eyed, ghost-like. I muttered, "She can't be alive. She can't." But the thought that followed was worse. What if she is, and she needs me right now? I pressed the accelerator. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. The city blurred past empty and slick. The stoplights changing from red to green, as if the world itself wanted me to keep going. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Same number. "Hurry!" My pulse jumped. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. My mind flashed through every memory of her, the way she hummed when she cooked, how she brushed paint across a canvas, whispering, "Freedom, Lauren. Always paint freedom." The thought hit me like lightning. If she was alive, maybe she had found a way to escape him. Or maybe he was behind this too. Maybe it was a trap. My father had a way of controlling everything, even fear. I thought of the way he'd looked at me the last time we spoke, a look that stripped me down to silence. My chest ached at the memory. Still, I couldn't stop driving. I followed the winding road back toward the cemetery, the same one I had just left. The rain had turned to mist now, soft and eerie, hovering low over the ground. When I reached the gates, the lamps flickered weakly, their light bending through the fog. I parked and stepped out. The sound of the car door shutting felt too loud in the silence. Water dripped from the trees like tears. I walked slowly, my shoes squelching in the mud, the chill biting through my coat. "Mom," my voice cracked. "Mom." If this is some kind of A sound cut through the air. Footsteps. I turned my flashlight on its narrow beam, trembling as it swept across the gravestones. For a moment, there was nothing but shadows. Then I saw it, a figure at the far end of the path near the willow tree. Small, hunched, soaked to the bone. My breath caught. The light touched her face. Pale. Familiar. My stomach dropped. "Mom," I whispered, my throat tightening. She lifted her head, her eyes, those same hazel eyes, brimming with tears. "Lauren," she said, her voice breaking. "It's me." I dropped the flashlight. It landed in the mud with a dull thud. I stumbled forward, the ground slipping beneath my feet. I reached her, my hands shaking as I touched her shoulders. She was cold, real, alive. My heart couldn't catch up to what my eyes saw. How I choked out. "How are you alive?" Her breath came out in short bursts. "I can't explain here," she whispered. "We have to go. Someone could see us." The words barely made sense, but the fear in her voice was enough. I helped her toward the silver sedan parked under the trees. As we slid inside, she grabbed my hands, her eyes fierce, even through tears. "Listen to me, Lauren. Your father, he tried to kill me." My body went still. The rain outside began again, tapping gently on the roof as if marking the start of something I could never undo. The sound of her words froze me, but at the same time, they unlocked something deep and buried. The part of me that had always known there was something wrong with our family, something rotten hiding under the illusion of wealth and grace. As we sat in the parked car, steam fogging the windows, I stared at my mother and realized this moment wasn't just about survival, it was about truth. "He tried to kill you," I whispered. She nodded slowly, her shoulders trembling. "He's been threatening me for months, controlling every account, every dollar, every breath I take." When I finally said no, he snapped. Her voice broke, and I reached for her hand. It was ice cold. I wanted to tell her it didn't make sense, that he wasn't capable of that. But then my mind started replaying everything I'd seen but never wanted to admit. My father, Richard Hayes, the man the business magazines called a visionary, had built his empire on control. He controlled his employees with fear, his business partners with money, and his family with silence. When I was a child, I thought his anger was power, his strictness, love. He told me what to wear to family events, what to study, how to smile when guests came over. A Hayes doesn't show weakness. He'd say, gripping my shoulder until his nails bit through my skin, I was 12 when I first saw him hit her. It was over something so small I almost thought I'd imagined it. She had forgotten to add ice to his drink during a dinner party. He smiled for the guests, charming polite. But when the door closed behind them, the smile died. I heard the glass shatter, then her muffled apology. When I peeked around the corner, he was gripping her wrist, forcing her to look at him. "Don't ever embarrass me again," he said through clenched teeth. That night, Mom came into my room, her sleeve pulled down to hide the bruise. "He's just stressed," she whispered. "He loves us. It's my fault." Even then, something inside me twisted. Love shouldn't look like that. As the years passed, he isolated her. He cut off her friends, shut down her art studio, claimed she was too fragile to handle finances. He had access to every password, every bank card, even her phone. I used to find her sitting in the garden staring at nothing. When I asked what was wrong, she'd just say, "I used to paint sunlight. Now I only see walls." In college, I tried to leave it all behind. I got a scholarship for design school in New York, but when he found out, he said no. "You'll stay close," he told me. "Your mother needs you." I obeyed like I always did. I stayed in Seattle and commuted from home. The day I graduated, he didn't come to the ceremony. He sent a bouquet signed The Hayes Legacy. I remember standing on that stage holding my diploma, feeling both proud and trapped. Mom hugged me afterward, whispering, "I'm proud of you, no matter what he says." I didn't know it would be the last time she said those words freely. She grew quieter over time, her laughter fading. Sometimes I'd find bruises on her arms, and when I confronted her, she'd smile that empty smile and say she'd bumped into the counter. The night before her supposed heart attack, I stopped by to bring her soup. She looked pale and tired. "Mom, you need to see a doctor," I told her. She looked at me, eyes wide with fear, then whispered, "If anything happens to me, don't let him handle the funeral." I didn't understand what she meant until now. In the car, I pressed my forehead against the cold window, the memories crashing over me like waves. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "All those years, I whispered you were living in fear." She nodded. "I stayed because of you. I thought if I kept him calm, he wouldn't turn on you too." Her voice broke again, softer than the rain outside. "I was wrong. You inherited my silence." The truth hit harder than any scream could have. I realized I had been molded by his control. Too obedient, cautious, small. My mother's survival had been about endurance. Mine had been about denial. I turned to her, my voice trembling but steady. "We're done living in fear." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes glassy. Then she smiled a small, fragile smile that carried years of pain. "Then we start by taking everything back," she said quietly. "Not just our freedom, our names." Outside, the rain slowed to a mist, and for the first time, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen since I was a child. Fire. Not the timid flicker that kept her alive all those years, but the kind that could burn everything he'd built to ashes. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the first step toward tearing down the house of control my father had spent his life building. The heater in the car hummed low as the world outside blurred into the gray of early dawn. My mother's voice trembled as she began to tell me everything. "It started 3 months ago," she said, staring through the windshield as if replaying a film no one should ever have to watch. "He wanted my signature on a new transfer agreement, one that would give him ownership of the art studio and our joint investments. When I refused, he said I was making a mistake I wouldn't live to regret." She looked down at her hands, still shaking. I didn't believe him at first. I thought it was one of his threats. But then things started to happen. She told me about the night she found her medication bottles swapped out, labels peeled off and replaced. The gas stove left on, the brakes of her car failing on a hill outside Bellevue. I felt sick. Each incident carefully planned, deliberate warnings, not accidents. "He was showing me what control really meant," she whispered. "It wasn't about love. It was about reminding me that even my breath belonged to him." My father, Richard Hayes, had always been a man who spoke softly but carried invisible chains, the kind that wrapped around you before you even noticed you were bound. I remembered how he had installed security cameras in the house for safety, how he checked my mother's phone under the pretense of protecting her from scams. He had always called it care, But now I saw it for what it was: surveillance. Possession. The night it happened, she said I was in the studio painting. My chest started to tighten. It was hard to breathe. I thought it was panic. Her fingers curled against her knees. Then I saw him in the doorway. He didn't look angry, he looked calm. He poured me a glass of wine, said it would help me relax. But the moment I took a sip, I felt it burn. Her voice cracked, tears slipping down her cheeks. I dropped the glass, and everything blurred. I remember trying to crawl for the phone. Then Lydia, the housekeeper, came in. She screamed. I heard her call 911. 911. He told her to hang up, said it was under control. But she didn't. The ambulance came. I remember the sirens. Then darkness. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could see it all: the perfect setup, the innocent husband, the widowed businessman on television giving statements about his wife's tragic heart attack. At the hospital, she continued, I woke up to voices. I heard him arguing with the doctor. He was asking about death certificates. I couldn't move, but I heard every word. She paused, her breath hitching. Then I felt a hand on mine. It was Clara Monroe. Remember her? She used to visit when you were little. She's a nurse now. She leaned down and whispered, Stay still. Don't speak. My throat closed. Clara. She had always been gentle, quiet, the kind of woman my father called weak. But she was the one who saved her. Clara told the staff I'd gone into cardiac arrest. She switched my chart, created a death record under a different ID. She even arranged for a closed casket. They used a mannequin from the hospital's training wing, same height, weight. I covered my mouth. You let everyone think you were dead. She nodded slowly. It was the only way to survive. Clara drove me out the back entrance that night. I stayed in a safe house outside Portland under a new name. I thought once he believed I was gone, he'd stop, that he'd finally be free of me and move on. And he did, I whispered bitterly, straight into the arms of Vanessa. Her lips trembled. I saw the pictures online, the way he smiled. He looked relieved. The silence stretched. The only sound was the rain starting again, tapping gently on the roof of the car. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. He would have killed you, and no one would have believed me. She turned to me, her eyes fierce through the tears. That's why I had to come back. I saw the post. I knew he wouldn't stop with me, Lauren. He'll come for you next. The accounts, the inheritance, everything. You're his last obstacle. The weight of her words hit me like thunder. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach twist. I thought of the way he'd smiled at the funeral of my grandfather years ago. Calm, polite, untouchable. The man had turned funerals into business meetings. So what do we do? I asked. She looked at me, her eyes dark with something fierce. We stop him first. Her certainty jolted me. It wasn't the voice of a victim anymore. It was the voice of a woman who had come back from the dead to finish what she started. He's built everything on lies, she said, and we're going to burn those lies to the ground. The word burn echoed between us heavier than the storm outside. I could see it now, the faint light of vengeance flickering behind her fear. For the first time since her death, my mother looked alive. The next morning, the sky over Seattle was a washed-out gray, the kind that smelled of wet concrete and ghosts. Mom and I sat at the small kitchen table of the rented apartment she'd been hiding in bare walls, a flickering lamp and a single potted plant that had somehow survived longer than we had. Her phone was off, her accounts closed, her name erased. It was like she'd never existed. But as she spread out the papers and flash drives she'd managed to save before disappearing, I realized she'd been preparing for this moment for months. He thinks I'm gone, she said, sliding a small USB toward me. That's our advantage, as long as he believes that we can get what we need. The USB contained copies of bank statements, property deeds, and insurance contracts, all bearing her forged signature. My father's empire wasn't just built on business, it was built on theft. These accounts, she said, tapping a line on one of the printouts, were opened in my name. Offshore transfers. Cayman Islands, Zurich. He's laundering through art sales. The words came out calm, but I could see her fingers trembling. I took a deep breath and forced myself into the mindset I used for client design projects, analyzing mapping solving. Okay, I said. He keeps originals at the office, right? Safe in his private room. She nodded. Behind the bookcase in the study, the code used to be my birthday. I'm guessing he's changed it. I looked at the sketches she'd drawn from memory layouts of the mansion's second floor, the security camera placement his office window facing the west garden. I can get in, I said, if I pose as an interior designer. His company just opened new properties downtown. If I schedule a meeting under the firm I freelance for, he won't think twice. She looked at me sharply. No, Lauren, it's too dangerous. He'll see you as a threat the moment he realizes you're not afraid anymore. Then he's already lost, I said quietly. He only wins if we keep being scared. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded, a mix of fear and pride in her eyes. All right, but if you go in smart. That afternoon, I met with her friend Charlotte Wells, a sharp, composed attorney in her 40s who had once been a mentor to Mom during her art licensing days. She listened carefully as we explained what we had. Everything you're describing fits a pattern, Charlotte said, tapping her pen against a notepad. Forgery, coercion, financial abuse. If we can prove intent, especially with evidence of attempted harm, it's not just fraud. It's attempted homicide. The words chilled me, but they also gave shape to the nightmare we'd been living. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was a case. Start documenting everything, Charlotte continued. Emails, texts, timestamps. And whatever you find at his office, make sure it's copied, not moved. The second he knows you're onto him, he'll erase every trace. I left her office with a folder of legal templates and a plan. That night, while Mom slept on the couch, I stayed up mapping every step on my laptop. Camera angles, security windows, time schedules. My design training had taught me precision. Now I was using it to dismantle a monster. 2 days later, I walked through the glass doors of Hayes & Cole Properties dressed in a beige coat and heels, carrying a portfolio of mock renovation plans. The receptionist smiled, oblivious. Mr. Hayes is expecting you. The sound of his name still made my skin crawl. When I entered his office, the air smelled of leather and cologne. He was seated behind his desk, silver hair immaculate, the picture of power. He looked up and smiled, warm but hollow. Lauren, didn't expect you. How are you holding up one day at a time? I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I thought I'd bring by some design ideas, something to brighten the downtown lobby. Always the creative one, he said. Your mother wanted you to be practical. Guess she lost that battle. I smiled tightly, pretending the words didn't sting. He offered coffee. I declined. As he turned to take a phone call, I scanned the room. The safe was still behind the shelf. The painting of the harbor above it slightly tilted exactly like Mom had described. My pulse pounded as I placed my folder on his desk, pretending to adjust the layout. While he spoke to his client, I slipped a tiny flash drive into the back of his computer. A recording program one Charlotte had arranged through a private investigator. It would mirror every document opened, every email sent. Evidence never blinks. I left 30 minutes later smiling like nothing had changed, but everything had. That night, when I returned to the apartment, I plugged in my laptop, the screen filled with files, wire transfers, contracts, insurance claims. Each one a piece of the puzzle he'd built to bury us. Mom stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. You found the trail. Not yet, I said. But now we can follow it. On the screen, one document stood out, a contract labeled Margaret Hayes, Life Insurance Payout, Beneficiary Richard Hayes. The date was 1 week before her death. The amount, $5 million. My stomach turned. Mom looked at the screen and exhaled shakily. He was cashing in on my funeral, and for the first time, she didn't look afraid. She looked furious. The night I decided to confront him, Seattle was drowning in rain again, as if the sky itself wanted to wash the city clean. Mom tried to stop me. Lauren, she whispered, gripping my wrist so tightly, her nails left marks. You don't understand the danger. He's not the man you think he is. He doesn't get angry, he gets even. But it was too late. I'd spent my entire life walking on eggshells around Richard Hayes, measuring every word, every breath to keep his world perfectly still. That night, I wanted to break it. I put on a dark coat and drove to the house I'd once called home. The mansion rose from the hill like something out of a memory grand cold hollow. The windows glowed gold, but the light felt sterile. Through the gates, I could see his car parked in the drive. He was home. My heart hammered as I walked up the steps, the umbrella heavy in my hand. I rang the bell once, twice. He opened the door himself, dressed in a navy robe, glass of whiskey in hand, looking completely unbothered. "Lauren," he said, almost cheerful. "To what do I owe this surprise?" "We need to talk," I said. He smiled that politician's smile I'd grown up hating. "You always had your mother's dramatics." "Come in, then." The warmth inside hit me like a slap. The scent of expensive cologne and polished wood filled the air. Every surface gleamed. Every photo on the walls had been rearranged. My mother's pictures were gone, replaced with Vanessa's. I felt my stomach twist. He led me to his office. "I assume this is about the estate," he said casually, settling behind his desk. "I'm finalizing the last of the paperwork. Once you sign, everything will be handled." I sat down, hands folded in my lap, pretending calm. "You mean the paperwork you forged?" His eyes flickered for a split second, the faintest crack in the mask. Then came the laugh, low practiced. "You've been reading too many crime novels. You really shouldn't have left copies of your emails unsecured," I said. "The ones with Vanessa the Shell, accounts the fake art sales. Oh, and the insurance payout for Mom's death. That was a nice touch." His hand froze midair. For the first time, he blinked. Slowly. "You've been snooping." "I've been learning," I corrected. "From the best." He stood pacing behind the desk, the calm unraveling. "Lauren, you don't know what you're doing. You're grieving, confused. You're letting your emotions get in the way." "No," I said. "For once, I'm letting them lead me." He slammed his glass down on the desk, amber liquid splashing. "Where did you get this information?" "You should ask yourself who helped her," I said softly. His jaw tightened. She's dead." "Is she?" The silence between us stretched until it vibrated. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, its steady rhythm the only sound. He stared at me, realization dawning. His face drained of color. "You've seen her." I didn't answer. "Impossible," he hissed, circling the desk like a predator. "She's gone." I watched. He stopped himself. "You watched what I demanded." He smirked, regaining control. "You really think your mother was some saint? She ruined this family. She cost me everything. And you're just like her. Emotional. Weak." "Weak," I said, standing now, my voice shaking but sharp. "You built your empire on threats and manipulation. You call that strength? You think control is love." His expression hardened, all charm gone. "You don't understand what it means to build something, to protect it. That's what men like me do." "You mean destroy it?" I shot back. For a second, he looked at me with something almost like pity. "You're your mother's daughter, all right, and that means you're a liability." The next second, he lunged. His hand slammed against the desk, knocking the papers aside. "You don't get to walk into my house and accuse me," he snarled. I took a step back, my phone already recording in my pocket. "You don't get to decide who lives and who dies." His eyes went dark. She should have stayed dead. That was it. The confession. My breath caught. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" He sneered. "For saying exactly what the police needed to hear." The door burst open. Flashlights shouts the sound of boots on marble. 2 FBI agents stormed in, weapons drawn. "Richard Hayes, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and attempted homicide." He spun, furious. "You set me up." "No," I said, stepping back. "You did that yourself." The agents restrained him, reading his rights. He fought, shouting my name like a curse. "You think this ends with me? You're nothing without me, Lauren. Nothing." But his words didn't cut anymore. They bounced off like rain on glass. Mom stepped out from the hallway, pale but standing tall, her eyes locked on his. The moment he saw her, his body went rigid. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You can't. You're dead." She took one step closer, her voice steady. You tried to make me, but you failed. He struggled against the agents screaming her name, but they dragged him out into the storm. The front door slammed. Silence filled the house. Mom looked at me, tears trembling in her eyes. It's over, she whispered. I shook my head. No, Mom. It's just beginning. Outside, the red and blue lights faded down the hill. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like a prison. It felt like an echo of the past, finally broken. The night of his arrest felt endless, a blur of flashing lights, rain-soaked agents, and the sound of my father shouting as they shoved him into the back of a black SUV. The neighbors had gathered at their windows, faces glowing blue from the police lights. Some looked shocked. Others whispered as if the scandal were entertainment. To them, Richard Hayes was a man of prestige, a real estate mogul, a philanthropist, the picture of success. They didn't know the rot behind the glass facade. Inside the mansion, the silence afterward was deafening. Mom stood near the staircase, gripping the railing as if afraid she'd collapse. Her hair was damp, her face pale, but her eyes, they burned with something fierce and exhausted all at once. I walked over and took her hand. She looked at me as though she still couldn't believe what she'd seen. You were right, she whispered. He really thought he owned everything, even our lives. He doesn't anymore, I said softly. We stood there for a while, surrounded by the echo of the home he'd built as a monument to himself. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every detail screamed control. His presence lingered like the smell of cologne and whiskey in the air. It would take more than a police raid to wash that away. By morning, the news broke. Seattle business icon arrested for fraud and attempted homicide. His face was everywhere on TV, on websites, even on the front page of the Seattle Times. They used his company portrait, the same one that hung in the office lobby, confident, polished, detached. But underneath the headline, the truth finally bled through. The empire he'd built on intimidation and deceit was collapsing in real time. Mom and I watched from the small apartment she still refused to call home. The reporter's voice droned on about ongoing investigations and a pattern of domestic abuse allegations. When they showed footage of the arrest, I saw myself in the background, soaked trembling but standing tall. Mom turned off the TV. I don't want to see his face anymore, she said quietly. Then she added, I want to see mine again. That's when I knew what we needed to do next. It wasn't enough to bring him down. We had to reclaim our lives. The next few days were a haze of interviews and statements. The FBI wanted details. The press wanted quotes. Charlotte, our lawyer, became our shield filtering the noise. She handled the reporters who camped outside the endless phone calls from old friends, suddenly pretending to care. Stay calm, she advised. Don't engage. The evidence speaks louder than anything you could say. But silence was hard. Every time I opened social media, there were headlines, photos, strangers debating our lives. Some called my mother brave. Others accused her of manipulation, of lying about her death for sympathy. The cruelty stung, but I reminded myself people always prefer a version of the story that doesn't challenge their comfort. At night, I'd find Mom sitting by the window, staring at the rain. Do you ever think, she said one evening, that monsters like him are made by silence? Yes, I said, and we fed it for years. She nodded slowly. Never again. When the court hearing date arrived, we walked up the courthouse steps together. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair pinned back, no makeup, except a faint lipstick, the same shade she used to wear when painting. The cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name. She didn't flinch. Inside the courtroom, he looked smaller, not physically but spiritually. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something gray and empty. When they brought him in wearing the standard-issue suit and cuffs, his gaze flickered to us for just a moment. I saw the man who'd once towered over us reduced to silence. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, emails, transfers, the forged documents, the recorded confession. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer. Charlotte leaned toward us and whispered, "He's done." Then it was Mom's turn to testify. The entire room went still as she took the stand. Her voice didn't shake once. She told the story from beginning to end, the years of control, the threats the night he tried to end her life. She didn't cry. She didn't embellish. She just told the truth, plain and devastating. When she finished, you could hear the audience breathe again. Then my turn came. I stood palms damp and met his eyes. My father taught me that control is power, I said. He was wrong. Truth is power, and the truth doesn't need permission to exist. He didn't respond. He just looked away, jaw-tight eyes hollow. When the verdict came down, it was everything we'd hoped for, guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, 30 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Mom exhaled, her shoulders trembling. For a second, she looked at him not with anger, but pity, the kind you give someone who's already destroyed himself. As they led him away, he turned one last time, his eyes meeting hers. "You'll regret this," he hissed. She didn't look away. "I already did," she said softly. And with that, he was gone, escorted out of our lives for good. When we stepped outside, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The air smelled clean, the kind of clean that comes after a long storm. Cameras flashed again, but this time I didn't hide. Mom took my hand. "What now?" she asked. I looked up at the sun breaking through the clouds. "Now," I said, "we build something honest." And for the first time since that first message appeared on my phone, I meant it. The weeks after the verdict felt strange, quiet, almost weightless. For so long, our lives had revolved around surviving him, anticipating him, fearing what came next. And suddenly, there was nothing left to fear. The silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt clean. We sold what was left of the Hayes mansion through the court's restitution order. Every chandelier, every piece of marble flooring, every symbol of his control, gone. The money didn't matter. The cleansing did. Mom and I packed the last box together, standing in the same hallway where I'd once hidden from his temper. She ran her hand along the wall, her expression unreadable. "It doesn't even feel real," she murmured, like this place was just a nightmare we both dreamed. "Then it's time to wake up," I said. We moved to the Oregon coast a week later. A small cottage overlooking the sea, whitewashed walls peeling paint, a garden choked with wild daisies. It was nothing like the sterile perfection we'd known. It was imperfect and alive. The first morning there, I woke up to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt air. Mom was already outside, standing barefoot in the grass, the wind tangling her hair. For the first time in years, she was smiling. We spent the days painting walls and scrubbing windows, building something new out of our own hands. There were no maids, no staff, no pretense, just two women learning how to breathe again. Mom reopened her paints, the ones she'd kept boxed for a decade. She started teaching local kids to paint at the community center, her laugh returning little by little. The first canvas she finished was a field of wildflowers under a stormy sky. She called it Freedom. As for me, I opened my own design studio nearby, Hayes and Daughter Design. The name startled people at first. "Isn't that the man who?" they'd whisper, and I'd smile and say, "Yes. But this is the daughter who rebuilt what he tried to destroy." The clients who came were small businesses, artists, people who'd been pushed aside by those with more power. I specialized in rebuilding not just spaces, but people's sense of ownership. We became quiet legends along the coast, not because of what we survived, but because of what we chose after surviving. There were still hard days, nights when I'd wake to the echo of his voice in my dreams, the sound of him saying, "You'll regret this." But those nights grew fewer. The fear began to dissolve into something else resolve. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, Mom and I sat on the porch sipping tea. The air smelled of rain and seaweed. She was sketching something on her lap, a series of women's faces, each one different, but connected by a line of gold threading through their eyes. "What's that?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "A new series. I'm calling it The Ones Who Lived. I think I want to hold an exhibit one day. Not about pain, but about what comes after." I nodded, watching the waves. "You should. People need to see that survival isn't the ending, it's the beginning." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the ocean's rhythm. Then, almost hesitantly, I asked the question that had haunted me since that night at the cemetery. "Mom, that first text, the one from your number, if your phone was off, who sent it?" She set down her pencil, brow furrowing. "It wasn't me," she said slowly. "Clara had the phone for the hospital records, remember?" I frowned. "Clara said she didn't send it." Mom looked out at the sea, her face thoughtful. "Then maybe it wasn't meant to be explained." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from wonder. Maybe the universe had decided that truth shouldn't stay buried. A few weeks later, I visited Clara to thank her properly. She was working at a small hospice clinic in Portland, her hair grayer, her smile softer. "You two did it," she said proudly. "Most people never make it out of his kind of control." "We didn't just make it out," I told her. "We burned the whole cage down." When I returned home that evening, Mom was sitting by the fireplace painting again. The room glowed gold from the light. She looked up and smiled, eyes shining. "It's strange," she said. "After all this, I don't feel like I got revenge. I feel like I got peace." I knelt beside her, brushing a smear of blue paint from her cheek. "That's the best revenge there is." Outside, the storm clouds that had lingered all day finally broke apart, revealing a sky streaked with stars. The waves roared like applause. In the months that followed, life found its rhythm again. The trial became yesterday's news. The name Richard Hayes faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals, new villains. But for us, it ended with quiet mornings and long walks by the shore. Every so often, someone would recognize Mom at the farmer's market. "You're the woman who came back from the dead," they'd whisper. And she'd just smile and say, "No, dear. I'm the woman who finally started living." One night, as we locked up the studio after a long day, I paused by the sign on the door, Hayes and Daughter Design. For years, that name had meant fear control and silence. Now, it meant creation, freedom, and truth. I turned off the lights, stepped outside, and looked toward the sea. The air was cool, clean, endless. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled soft this time, like a memory fading. And for the first time, I felt no fear at all. The storm was over. When I whispered goodnight to the wind, it felt like it whispered back, "You're free." 6 months later, the world had finally moved on, but our lives had just begun to settle into something resembling peace. The cottage smelled of salt turpentine and coffee, the comforting scent of a life built from nothing but honesty. Mom's paintings now lined the walls of our small living room, each one a different chapter of her rebirth. The storm, the graveyard, the dawn. I often caught her staring at them with a look that wasn't pride or sadness, but something between the two, a quiet reconciliation with everything that had been stolen and reclaimed. But justice has a strange echo. It doesn't stop when the verdict is read. It ripples outward, touching things you never expected. One morning, I opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope stamped with the federal seal. Inside was a formal notice, United States versus Richard Hayes, case settlement update. The attached letter stated that the court had approved the seizure of his remaining assets, properties, bank accounts, and offshore holdings, and had granted restitution to my mother for damages and medical fraud, the total $8.4 million. I read it twice before I could even process it. "Mom." I called, walking into the studio. She was painting by the window, the sunlight streaming over her canvas. "It's done. The court ruled in your favor." She turned slowly, brush still in her hand. "I don't care about the money," she said, though her voice trembled. "I just wanted acknowledgement, proof that the truth won." I smiled. It did, on paper and ink forever. That afternoon, we went into the bank together to set up the restitution account. The teller, a kind woman in her 50s, looked up from the paperwork with a faint smile. "It's rare to see cases like this in the right way," she said. "You must be proud." Mom hesitated, then nodded. "I'm grateful," she replied softly. Pride was his disease. Gratitude is mine. Over the next few weeks, Mom decided to use part of the restitution funds to open an art scholarship for women recovering from domestic abuse. She named it the Evelyn Project, a tribute to her middle name, the part of herself she'd buried for years to survive. The first exhibition of her students' work was held in a small coastal gallery. When she stood up to give her speech, she didn't talk about pain or violence. She talked about freedom, about how survival wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one. Her words spread beyond that little room. Local journalists covered it, then regional outlets, and soon her story became a symbol of reclamation. She never mentioned his name in interviews. Not once. "He's not my legacy," she'd say. "My freedom is." Meanwhile, I found my own rhythm again. My studio flourished quietly. Clients came because they'd heard whispers of a woman who rebuilt her life from ashes. I never advertised. I didn't need to. Word of mouth among the small business community in Oregon carried further than any billboard could. People trusted someone who understood what it meant to start over. One day, Charlotte, our lawyer, called to tell us that Richard's appeal had been denied. "He's serving his full sentence," she said. 30 years, no early release. I thanked her, but when I hung up, I didn't feel joy or relief. I just felt still. That night, I sat by the fireplace flipping through an old photo album Mom had salvaged from the storage unit. It was full of moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Birthdays, vacations, staged family smiles. In every photo, my father's arm was around her shoulder, his hand heavy, possessive. I closed the album. That story was over. But one photo slipped free and fluttered to the floor. A picture of me at 10 years old, sitting in my mother's art studio covered in paint, laughing. Mom's hand was resting lightly on my shoulder, and the sunlight streamed in through the big window behind us. That was the woman I remembered, the one before the fear. I framed that picture the next morning and hung it above my desk at the design studio. Clients would sometimes pause to look at it. "You look happy there," they'd say. I'd answer, "And I am again." Life settled into something beautifully ordinary. The waves became our background music, the gulls our alarm clocks. We planted a small garden in the backyard filled with daisies, the same flowers Mom had painted in her Freedom series. She said they reminded her of resilience. They bloom even in poor soil. Every Sunday, we'd walk down to the cliffs and throw a few petals into the ocean for the years we lost. Not to mourn, but to honor. One evening, as the sunset blazed gold across the horizon, Mom turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think justice meant punishment. Now, I think it means peace." I looked at her and smiled. "You earned both." We stood there together watching the tide roll in. Somewhere far away, a prison door closed on the man who'd once controlled every breath we took. But here, the air was wide open. Later that night before bed, I wrote a note in my journal, something I hadn't done since before everything fell apart. We are no longer what he made us. We are what we chose to become. When I closed the book, the wind outside rattled softly against the windows like a whisper. I knew it wasn't a warning this time. It was a reminder storms end, but the ones who survive them learn how to dance in the rain. The world had finally forgotten the name Richard Hayes. But on the coast, in a quiet studio filled with color, the name Margaret Hayes lived on not as a victim, but as an artist, a mother and a woman who refused to die. It's been 3 years since the night I stood under the rain at my mother's grave, the night my phone buzzed with an impossible message. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Life has taken on a rhythm that feels almost holy in its simplicity. The studio by the sea hums with the quiet sounds of brushes on canvas, laughter from Mom's students, and the rustle of wind through open windows. She teaches survivors how to translate pain into color. Trauma, she tells them, is just memory without form. Give it shape and you take its power away. Every time she says it, the women in her class nod, some crying silently as their hands tremble with the brush. Watching them, I finally understand what survival really looks like. It's not standing tall every day. It's simply refusing to fall again. Mom's newest painting, After the Storm, hangs above the fireplace. It's her largest piece yet, a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, hair whipping in the wind, the ocean roaring below. Behind her, the remnants of a storm fade into dawn. When she first unveiled it at a gallery in Portland, people gasped. A critic called it a portrait of resurrection. She just smiled and said, "It's a self-portrait, actually." The scholarship the Evelyn Project has grown beyond what we imagined. Galleries across Oregon and Washington now donate portions of their proceeds to fund it. Women from all walks of life have started applying: teachers, nurses, single mothers, retired secretaries. The first recipient, a woman named Lena, sent Mom a handwritten letter that I keep folded in my planner. It says, "Your courage gave me permission to exist again." As for me, Hayes and Daughter Design has turned into something more than a business. We've begun partnering with nonprofit housing initiatives, redesigning shelters for women starting over. One of our projects was converting an abandoned motel into a safe house for survivors. On the day it opened, I walked through the renovated rooms, bright, warm, safe, and realized I'd spent years designing spaces for clients, but this was the first time I'd built something that truly meant freedom. Sometimes reporters still reach out. They want to do retrospectives, documentaries, podcasts. I always decline. The story doesn't belong to headlines anymore. It belongs to the quiet mornings and unspoken peace between us. One autumn afternoon, I received a letter from the prison. It was addressed to me, written in my father's distinct, immaculate handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity won. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Lauren, if you're reading this, I assume you've made peace with what happened. I haven't. I never will. Not because I regret what I did, but because I don't understand why you needed to destroy me to feel free. One day you'll see that power isn't evil. Weakness is. Richard. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. For the first time, his words didn't sting. They sounded like echoes from another life, an era where control masqueraded as love. I tore the letter into small pieces, lit a match, and watched it burn in the fireplace until it was nothing but gray dust. That night, as the flames died down, Mom looked up from her sketchbook. Was that him? Yes, I said. She didn't ask what it said. She just nodded. Then that's the last time he gets to take up space in this house. We opened the windows and let the ocean wind carry the ashes away. Winter came soft and slow. On Christmas Eve, the community center held an art auction for the Evelyn Project. Mom's painting sold for a record amount. The local mayor gave a small speech calling her a symbol of strength. When she stepped up to the podium, she said simply, "I'm not strong. I was just tired of being afraid." The crowd applauded, but I saw her smile. It wasn't for them. It was for me. After the event, we drove home along the cliffs. The road shimmered under the moonlight. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone to the cemetery that night?" she asked. I thought about it, the rain, the text, the impossible moment where grief turned into revelation. All the time, I said, but I think the truth finds its way to the people who need it most. She nodded. It did. We sat in silence for the rest of the drive, the sea stretching endlessly beside us. Now, whenever I visit the shoreline, I bring fresh daisies, the same kind from her first painting, and leave them on the rocks. The tide always takes them, scattering the petals like small white prayers across the water. People often talk about revenge as victory. They imagine it loud cinematic final. But the real kind of revenge, the quiet kind, looks like this: waking up without fear, breathing air that belongs only to you, and knowing that peace is no longer something you have to earn. Sometimes when I lock up the studio at dusk, I catch my reflection in the glass door, calm, steady, free. I see traces of her in my own face. The same strength, the same defiance. And every night before I turn off the lights, I whisper the same thing I whispered at her grave that rainy morning. You didn't deserve what he did to you, Mom, but you survived. We both did. Outside, the waves crash and retreat in their endless rhythm, a reminder that even storms surrender to calm eventually. That's the legacy we chose. Not his name, not his empire, not his darkness, ours. And though the world will never know every detail, the truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs witnesses. We are those witnesses, mother and daughter, reborn from rain and ruin, finally free. If this story moved you, take a deep breath and remember, peace after betrayal isn't weakness, it's power reclaimed. Every storm ends and every scar can become art. Wherever you're watching from, tell me in the comments, have you ever rebuilt your life after someone tried to control it? Your story might help someone else find their freedom too. If you believe in justice, redemption, and starting over, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. New stories every week about truth survival and the quiet strength that rises after the fall. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is peace.